Discovering your why. Why did I act out? What was going on in my head? You need to determine this for good recovery. And if you're married, your wife's going to want to know why all this happens. Because ultimately, you getting sober isn't going to bring her the safety that she desires. The safety and the trust that she wants to rebuild, that will only come when she feels like you have a plan that's going to protect the relationship, a plan that's going to prevent you from engaging these unwanted behaviors. But again, if you don't know why you did it, then you don't know how to treat it, how to change it, how to modify it. And so therefore, you're basically just hoping it doesn't happen again. Well, that's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be good enough for your wife, and it shouldn't be good enough for you. So how do we determine why we acted out? Well, we kind of have to examine a few different things, right? There's an emphasis in this field on it being an addiction, right? That it's a sex addiction, a porn addiction, that the guy has become addicted to sex porn or affairs. And that can be the case. I've definitely met addicts. There was a portion of actually my compulsive behavior that was dopaminergic and addictive, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, an addiction would be, in the case of sex and pornography, they're seeking dopamine from the sex and pornography to shift their attention away from something else, right? So it's an escapist practice, right? That's really the hallmark of a dopaminergic sexual compulsion is I want to escape or vacate my life, right? There's some sort of unwanted, stressful event. There's emotions that I'm feeling that I don't want to feel. There's a story about myself concept of failure, of being behind, of not being good enough that I don't want to live with, right? So these people are trying to escape these unwanted feelings, these unwanted stories that they don't want to have to deal with, right? So that's the hallmark of addiction when we're talking about somebody seeking dopamine is escaping one's life, vacating, unplugging, getting a release, right? So if you're an addict, then you fall into that category, right? And this is why the why matters, is if it truly is a dopaminergic escapist practice, then the modification is, why do I feel the need to escape my life? And there's a couple different things you can do there. You can change the aspects of your life that you don't like, that are unpleasant. Sometimes that's possible. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes the stressful situation can't just simply be changed. But if you can change it, change it. Because now there's going to be less of a need to escape or vacate your life or unplug or get some sort of release, right? The other option is learn healthier coping strategies. We were born here to cope with life and handle life stresses without addiction. People can handle stresses and the things that life throw at them without turning to some sort of dopaminergic escape practice. Human beings are equipped to be able to healthily navigate this. But again, a lot of people just don't know how to do that, right? It hasn't been taught to them. It wasn't modeled for them, right? So there's a couple different other angles there that addicts will need to navigate. But if you're a true addict, then the why is going to be, I'm escaping or vacating my life, and I need to come up with better coping strategies to deal with that don't involve violating my integrity, or changing my actual life situation so that I'm not constantly facing these unwanted feelings, emotions, and stories about myself that I don't want to deal with. And more than likely, it's probably going to be a combo of the two, all right? I don't think just the strategies are enough, and I don't think just changing your environment enough. I think if you're trying to recover as fast as possible, I think doing both simultaneously is to your advantage. But again, this is only a portion of the population. My groups, we actually find that most men are not actually sex addicts, porn addicts. A lot of the guys in my groups, being high achievers, entrepreneurs, a lot of them have a pretty sweet life set up that they've built, right? So vacating it and escaping it's not actually what they're doing quite often, right? They might use porn or something as a bit of an escape here and there, but the bulk of their acting out behaviors and most of their fantasies are actually around enhancing their life, adding something that's missing, right? So this would classify as more of compulsive behavior rather than addiction, right? They're doing something that violates their morals and values. It's not the type of man that they want to become, but they do it anyways, right? So that's compulsive, right? And the objective here is, I always say, it's rather than using sex and porn and affairs as an escape, they're using it as a means, right? Now, this should not be confused with that they're not coping, because they are coping, and they are coping by feeling the void and enhancing. So what is coping? Coping is when we use something that was designed for something else and we're using it for something that it wasn't designed to do. Well, that would be a bad coping strategy, right? Healthy coping strategies where we're taking this strategy and we're coping with the stress using it. But unhealthy pattern would be, I'm going to use this thing in the case of what we're talking about today. I'm going to use women. I'm going to use their bodies. I'm going to use the sexual interaction. I'm going to use that to enhance the way that I am feeling about myself, or a feeling that I want to feel that I don't feel enough of. I'm going to use women and sex and their bodies to get that feeling, right? So that would be an unhealthy coping strategy. So I would say it's pros and cons, right? If you're an addict, I would say the recovery process is actually potentially a little bit harder and more challenging, resembles more of an addiction. So there's some setbacks and some slips. It can be very defeating and frustrating. The good news that I've seen is when addicts can figure out better strategies or modifying their environment that they want to escape, they actually get into pretty dang good recovery. And if they can maintain that, they can actually maintain long-term recovery better than some of my compulsive guys. Whereas the guys who are using sex and porn and affairs as a means of enhancing oneself, of filling a void, they have faster sobriety, I would say, but their long-term recovery is much longer. I would say a lot of the guys who fall into more of the compulsive category, these are the guys who are probably going to be recovering for the rest of their life because their brain has latched on to using admiration, being wanted, being chosen, feeling unique, feeling special. They have used that interaction for so long that they are probably going to turn to it quite often. It's going to be something that their brain's going to suggest, hey, we could go do this and this would make us feel this type of way, right? We could go have an affair, we could have an emotional affair, right? So the brain's going to be very resourceful in that way. And what I find is those compulsive guys actually have a longer road. Oftentimes they have to kind of stay in some degree of recovery forever to make sure they don't start using those unwanted patterns. But back to the why, if you look at compulsive men, so men who are not necessarily escape artists, right? They're not using sex and porn as escape, as an addiction. They're using it as a means to enhance. We have to figure out what they're after because not all people are using it for the same means. There are some guys who are using it in this very linear kind of like Hollywood Instagram way of I want to interact in these certain types of ways. I want women to say certain things about me. I want men to compliment me in a certain way. So they're on this conquest to basically get flattered, get compliments, and get attention so that they can honor and validate this story of, see, I am superior. I am accomplished. People do like me. I am special, right? So it can be navigating a very materialistic, status-driven story about oneself, right? So yeah, that's an option. But it could also be a maladaptive way of gaining control and individuality. There's a lot of guys who have a secret sexual life because they like having a secret sexual life. It gives them this feeling of control, independence. It's this little world that's theirs and they don't have to tell anyone and they can hide it, right? And that's actually far more common than you would think, right? So other things that fall into that category would be image management. These men who are obsessed with controlling how they're seen and manipulating their image and how they're viewed. These could also fall into men who have a very rebellious and defiant side of them, right? Because they grew up in their upbringing and they don't want to be normal because they've associated being normal or as average and they want to be special, unique, different. They will actually potentially latch on to sexual behaviors to be defiant, to rebel, because they've latched onto that at early years and they're now doing it as an adult. But then there can also be the very, very linear piece of I'm using sex and pornography or affairs to fulfill an unmet human need of connection, love, belonging, esteem, respect, admiration, right? So we have this human need that's very, very real, and we're using women in these various interactions to fulfill that need. It never works because those transactional, meaningless interactions never actually feel real, right? So this is why men who are engaging in their compulsive behavior to fulfill some sort of unmet human need that they have, it never works because sleeping with a prostitute just doesn't make you feel connected, wanted, like there's this intimate exchange, right? In your head, you thought it was going to work and then you go do it and you feel total garbage right when you're done. All these topics deserve way more of a discussion. My point wasn't really to help you find your why. My point was telling you that can you really be in good recovery unless you know what your brain is after? Because it's a perceived value. Humans are intentional creatures. We don't do things for no reason. If you see somebody who's doing something that looks harmful to themselves or harmful to others, rather than judging them or you're doing it, judging yourself, you got to ask yourself, why is this happening? There is some perceived value that the brain is convinced actually makes sense. So while on the outside it looks insane, to the person engaging in the behavior, they actually genuinely feel like this is the best plan that's available to somebody like me in this given situation. situation. And this is why finding the why behind your compulsivity is so important. Again, I don't think you can be in good recovery unless you know pretty darn well what category your brain is operating in. If you don't know what's driving your addiction or your compulsive behavior, I don't think you can get into a place where you're going to be able to prevent it from happening again. Because think about it, if you don't know that, you're just relying on luck, and luck is not a safe strategy when you're trying to overcome compulsive sexual behavior.